as a source of energy, of course. Then from the leaves we've got the vitamins and minerals, and of course leaf protein. We tend to forget that these young leaves have quite a good dose of protein in their own right.
Of course, the problem with a meal like this, archaeologically, hardly anything's going to remain, is it?
We get a few pieces of eggshell, a few bits of charcoal. You have no hint at all as to whether they've eaten any greens with it. Of course, they're not going to survive. In fact, as usual, archaeology offers a very narrow window on the past.
Archaeologists have found evidence of our ancestors eating adult wildfowl, which suggests they hunted on estuaries and inland lakes. And paddling a canoe is a timeless way to explore these still waters. I'm paddling very quietly here because what we've got behind me, got all these cormorants and some herons. I don't know whether you can see, but up in the ivy there's a heron's nest with two herons sitting on top of it. Places like this have got a real atmosphere. I can't help thinking that that wouldn't have been lost on our ancestors as well. Maybe these are places where there were birds of some sort of religious significance. We'll never know. It would be supposition to say. But certainly, birds like this would also have been on the menu. And there's the opportunity, obviously, to collect eggs, to come looking for young birds, fledglings on the nest. Maybe some of the birds, young youngsters, could have been tied into the nest so that they were fed to a large size. That was done later in history with pigeons. Who knows? What I like to think is that our ancestors, like many of the native people that I've worked with, would have had a detailed knowledge of how many eggs they could take from the nest so that they didn't overexploit the resources that nature provided them. And that's one lesson we could do with remembering today. So we've travelled through marsh, wet woodland and lakes and seen how it's possible to find a diverse diet. But there's one last food we need to consider, and that's fish, which brings us back to running water. Rivers are the hardest wetland to revisit because they have been so altered and abused by history. But here it's different. This is the Ardeche River in the south of France. We've come here because there's a sense of wildness here you just don't get on British rivers. More than that, there's a strong archaeological heritage. All through the Stone Ages, the Old, New and Middle, people have lived here in this valley, making their living from this landscape. See you later. See you later, Ray. The Ardeche Gorge has the feeling of a forgotten world, with bankside plants which Gordon is keen to explore. The river cuts its way dramatically through a limestone plateau. Over thousands of years it has deepened this gorge, so that today the Stone Age cave dwellings of the past are found high up on the cliffs. When I travel through here, I like to think I can hear the voices of our ancestors echoing from the walls, teaching their children not just about where to fish, but also about the power and beauty of water as a life force. One of the real joys of the river is the health of the fish life here. All the shallows are literally teeming with small fry, and there are much larger fish to be found in the central channels. This is a food resource, of course, that our ancestors didn't waste, and there's lots of evidence for how people caught fish in the past using nets and weirs and traps, all sorts of inventions. But there's one particular device that they found lots of here in the gorge, and that's something I'm keen to have an experiment with while I'm here. All through this gorge there's plenty of evidence for the use of harpoons in the archaeological record. The points are made from red deer antler. It's a splinter split away from the main part of the antler itself. We don't know how they were actually attached because the spears don't survive. I've made my best guess here based on similar harpoons I've seen in Australia. But the interesting thing isn't actually how the spears are made or even how they're thrown. The interesting thing is knowing the light conditions so that you can see the fish, knowing the right weather conditions to go hunting, the right place. Those are the keys that make this technique successful or make it fail. And of course that knowledge no longer survives. So this is going to be a really difficult and interesting experiment. Of course, spearfishing is illegal, and we had to get special permission to try out this technique. We don't know if hunters used spear throwers in the Mesolithic, but they are known from earlier times, so I'm going to try it. I've made one based on an Aboriginal design that I was taught to use in Arnhem Land. It's deceptively simple, improving both speed and accuracy of my throw. No. But it doesn't guarantee success. These thin strips of riverside meadows and glades are fragments of a lost landscape which used to fringe all of our rivers. When farming began, it was these areas which were amongst the first to be cleared, so it's a rare opportunity for Gordon to investigate this ancient habitat and the wild foods it provides.
Now here's a plant worth having. This is a plant called the salad burnet. It's certainly more chewy at this time of year than it is earlier in the season, but it's fairly bland, a slight bitterness to it, so good eating as a salad. We gather a lot of this, I think. Well, here we have some plants familiar in Britain, thyme. There's the same lovely smell, and it's obviously with fairly bland fare sometimes, these flavoursome plants would be very important to hunter-gatherers, and to perk up the appetite and make the eating experience all that much more pleasant. In fact, virtually everything around here is edible in some way or other.
With his detailed knowledge, Gordon can see the landscape as a living larder. Even though wild foods seem plentiful here, we've got special dispensation to forage in this wonderful reserve.
Well, here's something worth having. When you want a sugar rush, and I must admit I'm a bit peckish now, let's see. These are really good. They're so sweet. They're very sugary, these flowers of the false acacia, and it's really good. Excellent.
Oops-a-daisy. That's the problem. That's the problem. Look at that. Broken the harpoon point. Takes a long while to make a harpoon like that. The last thing you want to do if you're a hunter-gatherer is to break it. The problem I've got is that the water is really milky. Normally here you could see for a metre or more into the water, but 2 days